Okay, really excited. So Nathan has been working in healthcare IT for almost 15 years, and he currently works at Holland Home, which is a nonprofit senior care facility, as the lead developer. And he also serves as a TA for a data science camp. And today he's going to be giving a talk on Flask as a micro framework for delivering a simple application for entering data into a CSV file. So I'm really excited about it. So welcome, Nathan. Thanks for giving this talk.
I've been doing this for about 15 years. I'm not quite the lead developer at Holland Home. I'm the only developer at Holland Home, or I do like to call it sometimes the lead developer on a team of one. And it's a really cool opportunity because it means I get a lot of just stuff that I have to do or that kind of gets assigned to me, but I get to pick how to do it. So I had a project I need to work on starting a few years ago and needed a web front end. And I've not done a lot of website design prior to that. So I looked at what was kind of big. And what I found initially was actually, I started doing it in Angular and then did C# for some of the back end, talking to the database, building APIs. And and that worked. I'm a big fan of Angular. It was actually a pretty cool project to work on. What I found with that is that it's huge. Huge to the point that every time I want to build a brand new web application for somebody, I've got to download things and it takes up a couple hundred megs on my hard drive. And it will usually take me 2 or 3 hours or more just to get my whole environment set up before I write any actual code. So, but that was fine. That was kind of what I knew. And it was, like I said, it's actually a cool framework to work with. But then about a year ago, I was asked to do the data science bootcamp. And part of that data science bootcamp, we got to do Flask. And I've been playing around with that ever since, because the nice thing with this is it's the opposite of Angular, and that it is very small. And what we're going to see tonight is we're going to get a small, easy to use little web application that I'm going to build from scratch I'm hoping in about 30 minutes. And it'll be about 60 lines of code and hopefully fairly useful to people. Whereas, like I said, if you try to get into Angular, it would take me 3 hours just to get it set up before I wrote those 60 lines of code. So we'll get started with actually building it. Before I do anything, just a little bit about my setup. I've got Visual Studio Code open over here. I've got on the right-hand side, I've got where we're actually going to be looking at our web page. This framework that I've got in terms of my folder structure is kind of going to be your typical for Flask. You can see I've got my main folder, which I just called real for some reason. And then I've got my main Python application. This is going to be driving our Flask and driving our web server. I've got the CSV that we're going to be building into. And the application we're going to be building tonight is going to be basically like a sign-in sheet. So there's not going to be much to it, but it's just going to take a person's name and take their email. We're going to put it in, we're going to save it to the CSV, and then we're going to display everything that's in that CSV back on the page. So, I've got kind of my data here, I've got my application here, and then I've got a folder here called templates. And this is where my HTML is going to live. And Flask actually does look for this folder. It's something we've run into as I've been doing the class, tends to throw the students off a lot because it specifically wants it to be named this. There's ways to change it, but I just want to point that out, that it does look for this framework. So like I said, we're going to get started on the app. One thing that I'll note is I'm going to take a couple of kind of detours as we do it. I'm not going to just sit and write the code for it. We're going to talk about, I'll kind of show you something and then we'll actually use it. So we're going to start by building basically the simplest web application we can possibly build. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just start by importing Flask. So I'm going to do from lowercase Flask, import uppercase Flask. And why is that? Oh, it's because I'm writing it in my HTML page. That's why it's not recognizing it. All right, from Flask, import Flask. Okay, and then I'm going to build a variable. So I'm just going to call it app equals Flask. So it's going to use our Flask object. You have to put in a name here, and I don't really know why. Every tutorial I've ever seen just puts the underscore name variable here. So I'm sure you could call it something else if you wanted to. I don't really see a purpose to it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start building routes. So routes are going to be your pages, or they're going to be ways that you interact. And so we'll build our first route, and we're going to do that by typing @app.route. And then I'm just going to put a slash, and we'll see why that is in a bit. And then I need to declare a function underneath it. So the name of the function doesn't really matter. We can call this whatever we want. It just has to be unique. So I'm going to call it index because it's going to serve up that index.html file. And then all I'm going to do for right now is I'm just going to return hello world. Like I said, I'm going to make the easiest application I can possibly make. And what I'm going to do next is just to show in a minute how this actually works. I'm going to do a second route. Oops, app.route. And this one I'm going to put another slash. I'm going to call it add new. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to create a function. And we're going to return, it doesn't really matter because we're going to get rid of it later, but I'm just going to put added because that makes sense for add new. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually run. So this is just kind of the framework, and then I need to actually run what's going to be our web server. So I do that by doing app.run. And I'm going to pass in a parameter that says debug equals true. And I'll explain what that does as we start to actually run it. And then now what I'm going to do, I'm going to save everything off, and I'm going to run this. Done3 app.py. And what you should see is this thing down here at the bottom where it says we're serving the Flask app. It says it's running in production. That doesn't really matter. The key thing that I care about here is right here where it's saying that it's running on, and then it gives me this address. So this application is going to just keep running continuously until I specifically tell it to stop. And what it's going to be doing is it's serving a little web server here on my local host. So if I come over to my Safari or Chrome or whatever your favorite is, and I paste this in, you're going to get to see that it's going to serve up my web page, which just says hello world. I should point out that I set my font on Safari really big for this so that we can actually see it. It wouldn't normally be this big. But so you can see this is my very simple kind of route. And I'm just, there you go. I've made a web page that says hello world. What I'm going to do with that second route, so I have my slash add new. The way that that works is that if I come back to my web up here in my browser, the slash is kind of your default. So when it told me it's going to run here, if I just put that in, it's going to run on whatever you put for just slash. If I want to get to add new, I put a slash and I put specifically the name of that route, which is add new. And so you get to see where it puts added now. That is case sensitive. So if I put add new lowercase n, you're going to say that it's not found, which is kind of annoying, but it is what it is. And so let me go back to my main, and we'll go back to my hello world. And one quick thing that I'm going to point out is that you really wouldn't want to do your HTML like this, but I can. So if I were to do just a simple H2 and save it and reload it, you can see it's actually going to render it as HTML. Now, like I said, you probably don't want to actually build your HTML in Python. There's better ways to do it. We'll see that in just a second. But you can, if for some reason you wanted to, or if it's something that's small enough that you think that's easy. So how do we actually build the HTML, elsewhere? Well, what I need to do is I'm going to come back up to the top where I do my import, and I'm going to do render template, or I'm going to bring in something called render template. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this return hello world, and instead I'm going to do render template. And I'm going to put in the name of my template, which is going to be index.html. And you can see that because that's the name of my file. And this is where, like I said, because it's calling render template, it's actually hard coded within Flask that it's looking for a folder called templates. You can, I believe, change that up here when you define your, if you look at the parameters into Flask, I think one of them is that you can actually change the templates folder. Yeah, that's right here. but I've never felt the need to do it. You might as well just keep it with the standard. So I'm going to come into index.html real quick, and I'm going to actually build a quick HTML page. And we're going to go ahead and do a title and a body. And I'm just going to say this is my template. I'm going to save it and come back over here, and I'm going to reload it. And you can see that it's pulling in that HTML from the file now instead of me just returning it from Python, which is going to be an easier thing to do. So my next step, now that I've actually built somewhat of an HTML page, let me build the real HTML page. And like I said, what we're going to do is, for now, we're just going to build a form that I can use to take in a person's name and their email address. So we're going to do form, put in input equals text. I need to give it a name that'll come into play later. And we'll just put it name because that's what we're taking in. I'm going to make it required. And I'm going to give it a placeholder. Actually, let me get rid of that so I have more space. We're going to have a placeholder of just enter your name. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the email. Oops. Equals email. We'll also make it required. One day I'll learn how to type. Enter your email. And then we just need a button. And I need to type equals submit. And I'm just going to call it add. All right, save it, reload it. And so you can see I've got my nice little form here based off of what I did. A couple things to note, nothing special. This is coming just easy from HTML. Is that if I hit my add button, it's going to actually tell me, because I told it it was required, it's going to make me put it in. And then if I do my email, that's also required, but it's actually going to check to make sure it's a valid email address. And so now that it's in that format, it'll actually take it. When I hit the button, though, I'm not actually doing anything. For me to actually get it to do something of value, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back into my form, and I'm going to do action, and I'm going to pass it to that second route that we created. So add new. And I'm going to tell it that it's going to come in with a method of post. And that's for reasons why it's something we could talk about later. So now I'm going to, just to show what it did, we'll prove that it's going to my other route. So I'll go this, and can tell I care a lot about this text, whatever. I'm going to hit add, and it's actually going to tell me that we can't do that. And that's fine. What is happening is when I define this and I say I'm going to send it through post, I need to tell the route to expect that. So I'm going to put methods. It does expect that you can take more than one, so it expects an array, but we're only really care about the one. So I'm going to take the post method, and I'm going to load this again. Go for it. You are correct that there is in fact a typo. That should be submit. Thank you. Where was I? Yeah, so we added, so now we've got our route. And you can see that it's going there. It's not doing anything of value, but it's there. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to do something worthwhile with this. And I'm going to take in that data that we just got. And so the way that I'm going to do that is I need to add another thing up into my import, and we're going to add request. And then I can get that information off of my form by going to, I'll do name equals request dot form. And there's more than one way you can get data out of this request, but since we're using a form, it's easy. And I'm going to do name, and I'm going to do one more, email equals form email. Save that. And so real quick, when I'm putting name and email here, I'm just gonna point out specifically, that is coming from the name here in the input. So name is gonna match to name, email is gonna match to email. And so I'm gonna take that, and let's do that before we do anything else with it. I'm gonna print a name and email. So just so we can see that it's working. And let me go back, and I'm gonna whatever. And if I hit add, what should happen is, see now down here where I'm actually running this down in my terminal, you can actually see that it printed the name that I entered. I probably should have made this more clear, but it printed the name and it printed the email down here. Now users are not going to see that, but you, as you're writing your code and trying to debug your way through things, are. So if you find a variable is not working, if you find something doesn't, you can't quite get it to show up the way you want, sometimes this is really helpful. And then, like I said, it's going to show up down in your terminal. The other thing I should point out, because I promised that I would, real quick, if I save this, notice that down here it says detected change in, and it's reloading. That is happening because I put my debug equals true. If I didn't do that, then I think I have to actually crash, well, not crash, but stop the application every time I make a change. If you're doing something, when you're putting it in production, that makes sense. But when you're doing the development, it's much easier just to do the debug equals true. So now that I have my name and my email, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually save it to my CSV file. So you can see I've already got my CSV up here. I just called it data. It's got my 2 columns already set up. And all that I need to do is save to that. So I'm going to go with open CSV. I'm going to append to it as, just call it F for right now. And we're going to do f.write and F. Just getting that ready so we can actually take something in, and then name and email. All right. So what should happen now is when I actually put my data in here, and now I'll put not great data, but I'll put something that makes a little more sense. We'll just put test for my name and test@test.com for my email. What should happen now is when I hit add, it's going to tell us added, but most importantly, we're going to see that it should show up here now automatically in my CSV. So what we have already with 20 lines of code here and 12 lines of code here, we've already got a way that you can give this to people. It'd be kind of funny to host this already on a server, but if you wanted to, but you've got a pretty simple way of doing user input, HTML pretty front end, putting into the CSV instead of having people write it, in other ways. So that's pretty simple, and we've already got something that is somewhat functional. Now, what we want to do next is we're going to take it the next step further, and we're going to have, let me actually read that data.csv. So let me take this information and display it on this page so you can see who's signed up already. And so the way that we're going to do that, and this is going to be I'll do a quick little detour here, just to show you how we can pass parameters into our template. And then we'll actually build where we're doing the real thing. So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to build a couple variables. My string equals, this is a string. I'm going to pass in a dictionary. Dict is equal to, and I'm just going to be simple naming. So I'm just going to have column 1 and column 2. And then I'm going to do a really simple little, I'm going to do a list equals, and I'll just do range of 10. Okay. So I've now got variables. What I want to do is I'm going to set them up so that they show up on my page. The way that I do that is I'm going to pass them into my render template by just giving them variable names and kind of passing them that way. So I'm going to go my string equals my string, and my dict equals my dict, and my list equals my list. And technically, I don't have to do it that way. Like, this value of my string doesn't have to be the same as my variable name. I just think it's easier and makes more sense because it's easier for me to keep them straight, but you do whatever makes sense for you. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this and I'm going to open up my index. And what I want to do is, oops, I keep that body. For me to show it up, or for me to make this show up actually in my template, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 2 curly brackets, and then for the string, just the name of the variable. So that was my string. And then I'll put a quick break in here. And then I'm going to do for my dictionary, I'm going to do 2 curly brackets. I'm going to put, I think it was my dict. And then I'm going to do I can do a dot, column 1, or if I want to do with the square brackets, because maybe I've got a space in it, I can actually do that too. So I can do my dict, call 2. And just before I do the list, let me just prove that it's working. So I'm going to save it off. Let me reload this. And you should see this is a string and then my 1 and my 2 from my dictionary. So again, this was my variable. This is a string. And then my column 1, column 2, which are just 1 and 2. To do my list, I'm going to actually write a for loop. So I write the for loop by, I'm going to actually build this out as a list because that seems appropriate. I'm just going to build an unordered list. And then I'm going to build like I said, a for loop that goes curly bracket and then a %. And then I'm going to write it kind of like you normally would in Python. So I'm going to go for L in my list. And then I need to tell it when to stop. So I'm going to do curly bracket % and then end for. That is 1 word. And then in the middle here, I can actually use that L like I would any other variable. So I'm just going to do the double curly bracket in the L. So if I save this and I reload it, oops, I forgot to put the list item around it. So it is displaying the list properly. It's just my HTML is bad. So I'm going to do list item, save it. There we go. And so now I've got my quick unordered list of what I sent in as a list. So you can kind of see the building blocks there. Like I said, variable is double curly bracket. Dictionary is double curly bracket, and then the name of the dictionary and either dot the column or the square brackets and with the quote. And then the list is you actually have to write the for loop. And so where's my next? Oh yeah. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to read from my my CSV file. And so I'm going to get rid of this. For some reason, I'm going to use pandas to read the CSV, and I don't know why, but Visual Studio Code keeps being a pain in the butt about pandas. So I'm going to do it up here. Import pandas as PD. And I'm going to get rid of all of this because I don't really need these into my page anymore. And I'm going to get rid of these variables because I don't really need them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the CSV really simply just from pandas. So I'm going to say call it data equals pd.read CSV. And I need to point to my data is just called data.csv. And just to prove that it's working for us, I'm going to do a print of my data, just to prove that it's coming in. And we'll do that first before we actually run anything. Like I said, I can't do the terminal down here because Visual Studio Code doesn't like it. So I'm going to do my actual Mac terminal, and I'm going to go Python 3. And that should work. And the print statement that I put in won't happen until I actually load the page. So I'm going to go ahead and reload it. And oh, I forgot to clear out my HTML. So notice, because I'm passing in, I'm trying to use this my dict, and it doesn't actually exist. It's going to throw this exception. It's going to yell at me. So I need to get rid of that real quick. And then I'll come back and reload it. And so there's not much here. I don't know why that changed my font size. But what we should be able to see here is my right here. So you can see I'm printing out, I read from my CSV file, and you can see it's got the name and the email. Now, the one thing that you might notice here is this is in a pandas data frame. Flask is not going to understand what to do with that pandas data frame. And so what I have to do is I'm going to change it from being just data. So instead of this being data here, or just the read CSV, I'm going to put toDict. No, toDict. And I need to pass in that I want it to be in a records format. And I'm going to save it. And I'm going to come here and I'm just going to reload my page. And then coming back over to my terminal, you can see that this is now just a list of dictionaries. So this fits what I'm going to do on my page is I'm going to build just a for loop to go through my list. And then I'm going to treat the dictionary parts as variables. So I'll come back over here to my HTML. I go to index.html. I'm going to build a table for this. So we're going to do table, table row, table head, and then we're going to have a name, and I'll do my other table head, email. And then I'm going to build the rest of my rows in my table through this for loop. So I'm going to do curly bracket %, and then for row in data. And I'm going to do %, and for. And then I'm going to build my HTML that I want to have in here. So I'm going to do a table row and then table data. And then this is like, so this is just going to be a dictionary, or row is going to be a dictionary. So I'm going to do double curly brackets. I'm going to row.name. And then I'm going to do TD, and I'm going to do row.email. Save it. If I come back in here, if everything's working properly, what I should see now is a table with that information we added in, and it's not. And that's because I didn't actually pass data to it. And it's kind of weird how Flask gets picky about that. You'll notice last time it gave me an error. This time it's just not printing anything, even though I didn't pass data in. I think it's just because of how it gets used. So if I go data equals data, save it, reload it, there we go. So now I have a fancy little table. And if I add another one, keep with my theme of test to at test.com, and I hit add, then I'm going to come back over here and it's going to say added. And if I go back to my main page, I actually need to reload it just because of the way that works. And then it's going to tell me test 2. So it's actually going to reload everything. And it's going to put everything in there. That's a little bit annoying for me as a user. I don't love the fact that I had to hit the back button, and I don't like the fact that I had to reload it. So the last thing that I'm going to do on this page before we try to make this look a little bit prettier is I'm going to add one more part to my imports for Flask. I'm going to bring in a redirect. And I'm going to get rid of where we're putting added. And instead I'm going to redirect or return redirect. And then the route that I want to go to, which in this case is my main route. So if I save this and I reload it, and I put, like I said, I'll continue with my theme here. And I hit add, what it should do is it's going to automatically bring me back. It's automatically going to reload it. So now as I'm adding things, I can see that very easily on my page. Now, if this sign up list is confidential, that's obviously not a good thing. But if you were filling it out yourself, then it's really nice because you can see it grow as you're putting it in. That was pretty much all that I had from the Flask perspective. I am going to do really quick. We're going to make this look a little bit prettier. So I've got the Bootstrap, or I've got Bootstrap open over here. And you can find that, I should have done this. So you can find this really easy if I just look for Bootstrap. I'm going to look for Bootstrap 5. And I'm going to hit the intro page. That takes me to where I was. If you're not familiar with what Bootstrap is a free CSS library, kind of template that you can use. A lot of websites use it. I'd say probably most websites use it. And it's just going to make things really easy to make things kind of standardized and pretty. So I'm going to paste in that. And that was just from the quick start. It's just saying paste this in from CSS. And then in my table up here, I'm going to add, and this is just, like I said, this is coming straight from the Bootstrap thing I just loaded in, equals table. Oops. I think it's table dash striped. And I'm going to save it. I'm going to come back over here. And when I reload it, that should make my table a heck of a lot prettier and easier to read. And I can do the same thing with my button real quick. So I'm going to class equals BTN. That's BTN outline primary. You can tell I've been doing a lot of this lately because I have this all memorized. And so that makes my button a little bit nicer. And I can do the same thing with my, if I'm going to do this with my inputs, I should probably build this out a little bit differently. But for now, I'll just put it in equals form control. And this is going to look a little bit funny because it's going to take up the whole row, but we'll just go with it for right now. I'll put that on my email too. And there we go. So it's kind of, it's filling out the whole row, but that makes it look a little bit nicer. If I wanted to put these still on one line again, I'd have to rearrange some of this HTML, which I can do if people are interested, but I'm going to leave it for right now. So that was my really quick, like I said, really quick. We are using Flask. We're building a nice, fairly pretty little application without a lot of code, without a lot of work. We did that in, where are we at? 7:44, so probably about 30-40 minutes. And you've got this up and ready for people. So with that, any questions, anything people want to know, anything from here?
Great.
I
Any
have a quick
questions for
question.
Nathan? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Nathan. Thanks for the demo. It was really good. So my question is related to, comparison with Django. How about like security wise? How good is Flask, in point of view, like security and all those things?
So I can tell you, I've never done anything in Django. I started doing this instead. So I can't really speak to how good the Django security is going to be. I do know the concept here in Flask is they describe it as a micro framework because it really doesn't do that much for you. That's compared to, like I said at the beginning, compared to say the Angular, which was you get a whole bunch of stuff that makes a lot of stuff real easy once you get going with it. But it's also going to take a lot of space on your hard drive and it's going to take a long time to set it up. This is meant to, if you want to do security, I think you're probably implementing that more of yourself. So you can do it, but I don't know if it gets that for you. If there's other people that know better than I do, though, you're welcome to speak up because I've only been doing this for a few months.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Natso had a question online. How much does running a Flask app usually cost month to month?
It would depend, I think, on, I mean, really, you're just going to be hosting and probably your hosting fee. Now, everything I do at work, they're internal web apps, so we can spin up a new server for me to host. I don't do that for every app, but we've got an IIS server that hosts our internal web applications. We set that up really easy. I'm assuming for pretty close to free because we do it anyway. And so any Flask app that I'm running is going to be completely free. Other than that, you're going to have to look at whoever you're hosting. And so I do know one thing that we do in the data science boot camp is that there's a place called Heroku. I think that's how you spell it. Heroku. Is it Heroku app? No, here we go. Heroku cloud application platform. They let you host things online completely for free. Now, there's certain limitations to doing it. I don't know what those limitations are. We haven't played around, or I haven't played around a lot with it. But I do know that when we do things in a data science boot camp, we have them do their final project. And if possible, have them host it on here so it's easy to show off to future employers. And like I said, you can sign up, you can get something running completely free.
Great, thanks, Nathan. Any other questions, anyone?
I have one more question. So Nathan, in your use case, are you using it for some data science project, or is it for a web application, like like an e-commerce kind of thing?
For me personally, what I've done for the most part, they're more internal web apps, which I do. I wouldn't say for data science. I usually do it more to just display data. So we're not doing machine learning. We're not doing anything complicated. It's mostly like we replaced our payroll system a couple of years ago, and we had our old payroll system just sitting around, and they wanted to be able to look at it without actually having to run the old system. So I did an extract of the data from the database and then created a Flask application of just here's all the, here's all the info you would need. So I've done things more like that. Again, going back to the data science bootcamp that I work with, we had people that were doing things a little bit more machine learning related. I know there was one group, I'd have to ask them if I could send it out. I don't even know if it's still running. But like we had one group where one of the participants was a cancer researcher, and she had actual cancer data that she was able to, they did machine learning where you put in like 10, 15, something like that pieces of information, and it would predict based off of the real data, what was the life expectancy, how likely you were, I think, to survive it. And then if you didn't, what the life expectancy was. And they were able to do that, used Flask to display the final output and to take input from people. And then they got it hosted up here on Heroku. So you can do whatever you want with it. I just haven't done a lot of data science.
Got it. And just to clarify, so with Flask, in your use case, when you're writing, some of the legacy system and you're bringing in data, is there like a better way of putting some of the SQL queries in case if you're using it? Because then, the code become like a little messy. So just a thought on that.
What do you mean putting the SQL queries?
I mean, if you are querying data, so maybe you would have to embed some of the SQL code, right? If you are getting some data like that.
So I have it all set up through pandas. I think I do. I'm trying to remember. It's I think it's PyODBC to actually connect to the database. I've got pandas that brings it into the data frame. In terms of writing the actual SQL, I would never write SQL into an application like this.
Okay.
I write the SQL as a stored procedure in SQL Server. I should probably mention that we use Microsoft SQL Server, and other database systems might be a little bit different in how you do this. But in SQL Server, you can create a stored procedure. Then my command looks something, obviously it's going to look a little bit different, but it would look something like, I think it's pd dot, is it from SQL? Or is it read SQL? Yeah. And then mine would look something like name of stored procedure. So load employees or something like that. And that's basically all the code that I'm going to get. I guess there's a little bit more to it because you've got to somehow pass in the server and the database. But in terms of SQL code, this is the entirety of my SQL code. And the reason for that, again, is that I write the actual select statement in a stored procedure on the server.
So then that stored procedure is returning something, and then you will get that return into your pandas and basically getting into like a dictionary format, right?
Yep.
For the processor. Okay, that is really cool. Yeah. And just a thought, when you mentioned like a connection string and a server name. So normally, like we have to have like a password. What is the best way, to just keep a password into like a separate file, or
So again, the stuff that I usually do, because it all is internally facing, I usually am able to set it up where I just do Windows authentication.
Okay, got it.
So that's, and for anybody who's not familiar, that is just, it takes your Windows user that you're currently logged in as, and uses that to log into the server. So I don't usually have to put a password in. In the cases that I do, yeah, it depends. Either I'll put it into a separate file. What we generally do in the class is that we would build a config, like a config.py, and we import that. That's got your password in it. So that gets you a little bit of separation. I've also done it for some of, say, our API keys and things like that. I actually have a database table that I set up for all of that information. And so I have a separate query that I run that loads that from a different table, and then we'll pull that in. Then obviously you need a password to that main table. But for me, I don't need to worry about that because I can do Windows authentication.
Okay, got it. Yeah, thank you for that.
Mhm.
Any other questions, anyone? Okay, thank you so much, Nathan. I think we all learned a lot creating a simple Flask app, creating the HTML and even Bootstrap. So thank you so much for coming in and presenting that. That was really great.